Hi, Rob B here with Rob D, and welcome. It's the Property Podcast. It's episode 301, and I love this time of year. Not just because of the mince pies and the mulled wine, but also because we look back at our favourite resources. Coming up, our best books, apps, and podcasts of the year.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning, including just before Christmas, property investors come together to be informed and inspired. I've got to admit, this is, I think, my favourite episode of the whole year. Yeah, it's a lot of fun talking about property, and that's why we do it every single week. But I love talking about podcasts and books and apps that we've enjoyed this year. We always pick up a couple of great tips off each other, and we know from your feedback that you love it as well. So this year, no different at all. We're going to give you loads of reading and listening to send you into Christmas with. So if you do get a bit sick of your family, you've got something great to escape to.
So this episode is an absolute must for you going to the show notes. You need to go to thepropertyhub.net/resources 2018. That's thepropertyhub.net/resources 2018, where you'll find a list of all these resources. But we have to start, Rob, with podcasts. And like you said, I do love this because I get to pick up a few new podcasts myself. What have you been listening to?
Well, the first on my list is a podcast called Ask Mr. Wonderful. Is
it about me? I don't remember recording that one.
Well, believe it or not, someone has beat you to the branding.
Oh, no.
Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, which is the American version of Dragon's Den, is also known as Mr. Wonderful. If you don't watch Shark Tank, then you must. I bang on about this all the time, but it's a really great business show and really entertaining as well. He is probably the most entertaining character on there, and he's now got his own podcast where he deals out business and life advice. It's a really entertaining listen, and there's great advice in there as well. I listen to a lot of quite heavy business podcasts, so when I see this in my feed, I know I'm not going to be completely switching my brain off, but I know I'm going to have a nice, easy and enjoyable half hour as well. So strong recommendation to start us off.
Your friends and family may not always tell you the truth because they don't want to hurt your feelings. I'm not worried about your feelings. I want you to be successful in life, and that means you're going to have to deal with the truth every day. And that's exactly what I'm here for.
And next, a podcast so good, we're mentioning it for, what is this, the second year in a row?
I have to, because this is my podcast of the year. Again, I just love this podcast. I know you didn't take to it as much as I initially did, Rob, because a few of the early episodes were a little challenging to listen to with lots of wacky sounds and noises. But this podcast is called Masters of Scale. It's hosted by a guy called Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, part of the PayPal mafia. So when it comes to business, this guy knows his stuff. This is just such a good podcast. The caliber of people they get on there just exceeds pretty much any other podcast for me, certainly for business anyway. But I love the depth that they go into and the lessons they take from each episode. I personally have found it very useful for our own endeavours. So Masters of Scale for me is one of those podcasts that the day it's downloaded, I'm listening to it. And I can't say that for every podcast, but this one I'm still loving.
You'll meet the unlikely heroes of scale, the entrepreneurs who survived the oddest of odysseys, even by Silicon Valley standards.
I'm actually surprised anyone gave us money to work on this idea.
They'll speak heresies. They'll share their vulnerabilities.
Reid, you must realize I was a terrible speaker. My accent was even worse than it is now.
They'll eke out a living, if you can call it that.
I wasn't technically sleeping on the streets.
And also on a business theme, a newer podcast. This, I think, has only come out in the last few months. And this is one called Without Fail, Rob.
Yeah, Without Fail is from the media group Gimlet, who make a lot of brilliant podcasts. And another one of their podcasts will appear on our list later on. But this particular podcast was launched this year. And it looks at people who've done exceptionally well, but have also failed. But it's not your typical, it was going wrong, and then they really succeeded by the end. One of the first podcasts was the story of Groupon, where it was built to a huge scale, and then it all went wrong. But the lessons you could take from that, even on a small scale, and remember, property is a business, are there in droves. And if that isn't enough for you, it's really entertaining as well. I mean, the founder of Groupon, that's pretty high caliber. So a really, really good podcast. What I will add, though, is, if you're thinking, it's all business again, it's not. They've had athletes on there as well. It's a really interesting podcast, and I just think the mindset lessons that you get from it are fantastic. And of course, being a Gimlet podcast, it is really well produced.
Yeah, I've just started listening to Without Fail, actually. The Andrew Mason from Groupon episode was my first, and he is fantastic. I think he's one of the most entertaining founders to be interviewed. He's so funny and self-aware and a really great story. So that would be a brilliant one to start with.
I talk to people solving some of the biggest problems in the world. If this worked on acid rain, could it work on global warming? I mean, is it that simple?
I think it is, quite frankly.
I talk to people who are willing to share the unvarnished truth of what they've learned.
People always say, how did you sacrifice being a superstar to being a sixth man?
Yeah.
I always say, listen, man, you might be an engineer in the back room. You don't understand the impact you have on the company. At the end of the day, we all going to win.
Now, the next podcast on our list is one that we've got our producer Dan to thank for bringing to our attention. We hadn't found this one, but it's absolutely fantastic. We've mentioned it before in Hub Extra. It's called Business Wars.
Netflix beats estimates once again, adding 5 million subscribers in the quarter.
Adidas raids Nike, poaching its top 3 designers.
In the battle of the rideshare services, Lyft strikes Uber where it hurts.
Every day, business is at war. Blue chips versus disruptors, American giants versus Chinese competition, founders versus corporate raiders. Sometimes the prize is your wallet. Sometimes it's your attention. And sometimes, well, it's just the fun of beating the other guy.
Yeah, Business Wars is fantastic. It is a little bit cheesy. It's like the soap opera of business podcasts, but I just can't get enough. It's so addictive. I actually particularly enjoy the adverts because they are so cheesy. I actually listen to them. They're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So don't skip through the adverts on this podcast. They're well worth a listen because I end up laughing out loud on my commute. They are brilliant. But the podcast itself is worth listening to, not just for those adverts. It's just entertaining. It is an easy listen. It is a bit cheesy, but some of the battles on there are epic. You've got Microsoft versus Netscape. You've got Monster versus Red Bull. You've got Nike versus Adidas. And they tell each story over a few episodes. The first one I listened to was Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, and that was fantastic. So well worth a listen. Now, we've been a little business heavy, so a complete change of direction now for our next podcast. And I recommended this to Rob D and producer Dan, and really didn't expect either of them to listen to it. But both have, and Rob, you've loved it.
Yeah, this is called That Peter Crouch Podcast. And if you know who Peter Crouch is, that'll give you a good idea of what it's about. So it is a football podcast, but it's sort of not really. I used to be heavily into football when I was younger. These days, not really bothered at all, so I wasn't sure if I'd enjoy this. But really, you barely have to be interested in football in the slightest to enjoy this. It's more about the stories off the pitch and all the things that go on behind the scenes. And Peter is just really funny, and his co-hosts are great as well. It just makes for a really fun listen. Much like you're laughing on your commute at the Business Wars adverts, Rob, I think I'm just freaking everyone out and getting quite a lot of space to myself on the train as a handy side effect by just grinning to myself the whole way through this podcast. It's so fun to listen to.
Yes, Rob, your interest in football has dwindled, but producer Dan doesn't watch it at all. He's an Aussie for a sin. So he picked this up, and to be fair, I wasn't sure if he would like it, but he's been listening as well. He was really impressed by the podcast too. So if you're listening thinking, I have no interest in football, maybe still give it a try. It's really entertaining. It's not heavy on football. It's a really fun podcast.
Crouchy, there's a picture of you and Iniesta on your phone.
There is.
What's the chat here?
We're trying to get the picture of Iniesta.
It was. Yeah, he genuinely did ask me for a picture, and he said to me, "Peter Crouch, would you mind having a photo?"
What was the circumstances?
I was on holiday in Sardinia. He came over to me and he said, can I have a photo?
The problem is like we're now asking Crouchy to back this up with a picture, and he cannot find it.
Hence the reason I'm
going through his phone. So far, we've seen that he's got Robbie Fowler, Fraser from N-Dubs,
and Boy George,
but no Iniesta.
So that other Gimlet podcast we were mentioning is actually one I've not listened to yet. So look forward to hearing about The Pitch.
Yeah, really simple. It's audio Dragon's Den. It's as simple as that. Somebody comes on, pitches their business, investors give their feedback, and because it's Gimlet, who know what they're doing when it comes to these things, it's really well put together, it's really tense. Then you get an update on how the business is going after they've got the money or not at the end. So if you enjoy Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, This is more of the same, but in podcast form. What's not to like?
So about 2 years ago, almost exactly, my wife and I took our family to downtown Chicago.
So our platform was built to solve that problem.
When you pitch to venture capitalists, they don't make it easy.
Why'd you step down as CEO?
Why can't, the next, sprightly, young, awesome entrepreneur do the same thing?
Because in all sincerity, I think anybody can make this.
So that's all our podcasts, but we got an extra bonus this year because producer Dan has added his list of podcasts, and you can find his picks of 2018 on our show notes, a must visit this year, which is the propertyhub.net/resources 2018. Right, time for books, Rob.
Yes, a little bit lighter for me on the reading this year, but still managed to get a couple of good ones in there. The first on my list is called The Ascent of Money. It's by Niall Ferguson. So as the name suggests, it's a history of money in the world, going back hundreds of years and coming all the way back to the present day. It's one of those topics that could be really heavy and academic and hard to follow, and you think you need an economics degree just to understand what it's talking about. But I always admire books where the author does a good job of making something accessible that could be really complicated and hard to follow. And this is one of those books. It's a surprisingly easy read. So if you do have any interest in that topic, and seeing as it underpins so much in business and property, you probably should. It's a really good place to start.
The Rothschilds had decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain. Now they would help decide the outcome of the American Civil War by choosing to sit on the sidelines.
Next up, Rob, I can see you've got on your list a book that I've read. I'm sure you must have mentioned it on the podcast before in some form, but it's well worth mentioning again. This is Scott Adams' How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big.
Yeah, I think it's worth putting on the list. I really enjoyed this book this year, and I almost certainly picked it up because of yourself, Rob. But it's rare that I've read a self-help book at any recent period and thought, oh, there's something new. They tend to be the same thing, just put in different ways. Or maybe there's one little piece of information that's new and the rest is just rehashed. But there seems to be a lot of original ideas in this book, and I was marking stuff off. Now, he goes out of his way to say it's not a self-help book, but for me it absolutely is, but just without the cheese. It's a cheese-free self-help book. The guy is weird, but that's okay, most people are. But what's great about him is he doesn't hide it. It's a really raw book on how his life's been and how he's improved at things, and it's a really interesting read as well. If you've kind of read a few self-help books over the years and kind of given up on them, then maybe give this one a try. Or if you're still enjoying them, then you'll probably absolutely love this one because it's completely different. But it's absolutely worthy of making our top list this year.
Yeah, you're quite right. Most books like that are one idea where it could have been a blog post, but it's been dragged out to an entire book. This book is full of different ideas, so it's almost impossible not to pick up a few things that will make a real impact for you.
It's common when you ask others for career advice to be told to quote unquote follow your passions. At first, this advice makes a lot of sense. Passion makes you persuasive and more likely to sell your ideas to others, so it's likely to guarantee success, right? Well, according to Scott Adams, this isn't as true as you might think. Scott's experience working as a commercial loan officer at some point taught him that the best loans to make were to the people without passion, because they are the ones that look at the facts and choose their business adventures or ventures accordingly.
Next up is a book that we've also mentioned on the podcast before in Hub Extra. It's by James Schramko and it's called Work Less, Make More. This book is a lot more straightforward than the one by Scott Adams that we just mentioned. It is one simple idea, but it's a very powerful one. Basically, it's about making more effective use of your time. If you've read lots of books like this before, you won't find too much that's new in there, but it's a good entry point if you are relatively new to the world of business, and it gives you a great framework for thinking about things to make sure that you don't make all the typical mistakes that most people do early on. So an easy read, not for everyone, but if you are at that earlier point in your journey, it could save you from a lot of wheel spinning and frustration in those early years.
And we've even had the author James Schramko on the podcast 4 years ago. Over 4 years ago. Wow, we've been doing this a while. And if you'd like to listen to that interview, you can find it in this week's show notes or search for episode 53. You'll find him there when we were young business whippersnappers looking to learn from the best. And James Schramko delivered in that episode as well.
When I was sitting at a desk about 6 years ago and I quit that job to become a full-time entrepreneur, it was a choice where I wanted a business that could fund my lifestyle. That was really the order of things, because I was sick of slaving away in an office, and I wanted to create something that worked when I wasn't working. I didn't want a job-like business. I wanted a business that was creating an income that I can certainly get involved and I can work it, but I can step away for a little bit. And that's why I can travel and why I do have time off each day.
Okay, next on our list of books is one that I'm actually going to read over Christmas, and I can't wait to get into it. Because, Rob, you've talked about this in the same breath as American Kingpin, which was my favourite book of last year. Absolutely loved it. Still keep going on about it to all and sundry. And you've talked about this as being a similar kind of book and in the same league.
Yep, my book of the year this year is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou.
Pharmaceutical companies spent tens of billions of dollars on clinical trials to test new drugs each year. If Theranos could make itself indispensable to them and capture a fraction of that spending, it could make a killing.
This book, you would think, is fiction, but it's happened. It's unbelievable that this is a true story. Somehow, there was a business built that reached a valuation of over £1 billion, and it was all a sham. I'm not going to say much more. I don't want to ruin the story because it is so good. I really want you to listen to this one. Fantastic book. It seems though someone leaked our show notes to Bill Gates because he's also rated this as one of his books of the year. Bill, stop copying. But I can see why he has listed it, and it's ranked in one of his best books of the year as well. Absolutely brilliant. I listened to this particular book on Audible. It was fantastic, but I'm sure it's just as good in paperback.
So a good year for podcasts and a good year for books. Some strong ones in there. I've got another as well that I really enjoyed this year. If we talked about everything we enjoyed this year, you'd be here till New Year. So we're going to put that in the show notes instead. So go to thepropertyhub.net/resources2018 to find that one.
So that's podcasts and books done. Next up, we've got apps and tech. And first on my list is an app called Xero. Now, Xero was created by a guy called Kevin Rose. He's quite famous in the American startup scene. He created websites such as Digit, and he's good friends with Tim Ferriss. So if you listen to his podcast, you may have heard his name mentioned before. But he's created an app. It's free to download, and it's called Xero. And the whole purpose of Xero is it's to help you fast, or in particular, intermittent fast. Now, we could do a whole podcast on what is intermittent fasting, but luckily there have been plenty done. And in this app, you can actually watch videos, read articles, and listen to podcasts that talk about intermittent fasting. Now, all I'll say is that from all the podcasts I seem to listen to, many of the successful people on there tend to have a few similar habits. One of them is meditation, but another one is intermittent fasting. Now, this is something I've not done with great discipline throughout the year, but more recently with this app, I've been so much more effective. And Rob, it's not just me who's intermittent fasting, because obviously being an inspiring fellow that you are, you do it, of course, as well.
Yeah, have done for years. Used to do it more strictly than I am now. But there are so many diets and things out there that are complete fads and total nonsense. This one makes sense. It has a decent underpinning. This one makes sense. It actually has a decent scientific underpinning to it. And importantly, once you get into it, it's incredibly easy. It doesn't feel like you're making any effort whatsoever. It seems to be getting more popular recently, which is a good thing. And I've not tried out the app, but if that helps bring it to more people, then that's great. Okay, next on the list of apps, Rob, I don't know where you've dug these up for. You've dug deep into the App Store and found some pretty obscure choices. Next up, Instagram and YouTube.
Yes, if you'd like to waste some time this year, I've got two of the biggest apps on the App Store for you. But the reason why I've listed them there is just a change in habit for myself. I still read a lot of blog articles, and Pocket is my app of choice for consuming them. We've previously mentioned that a few times on the podcast. But I started to dig into YouTube this year, and I have to say I'm absolutely hooked, because their algorithm for picking content that you like after you get started is incredible. There's a little section on the right-hand side, if you're a YouTube user, you'll know all about this, that says up next, and it picks the next piece of content for you. After you've started watching a few videos that you're interested in, it's almost mind-blowing how effective it is at picking other pieces of content that you'll enjoy. And it's nearly always right. It's rare that I won't see something on that right-hand column that I'm not interested in. Really, really cool tool. Now, while you're on there, you want to check out the Property Hub. Make sure you subscribe. Not because of what we're doing now. Please don't look at what we've done recently. It's awful. But for what we're about to do. There's going to be loads of good stuff coming from us. It's going to be the first time you'll see us on camera next year on YouTube, so make sure you subscribe. You may be put off by that thought, but I promise you the content will be good. And Instagram makes my list because it's just a change of use for social media for me. I used to be quite a heavy Twitter user, certainly a consumer anyway, maybe not tweeting loads, but reading it on a regular basis. My consumption of Twitter this year has fallen off a cliff. I just found it so negative and hostile and aggressive, and it's just not the person I am or I want to be. So I found it a real turn-off. I've been using Instagram more and more, and I just love the sort of positive nature of the platform, that people are very encouraging. If I post stuff on there, loads of nice comments from other hubbers. The Instagram stories I can put on there as well. There's good interaction with people. So I'm finding probably the way I'm engaging with property hubbers the most at the moment is through Instagram. My profile on there, if you want to connect, is at Rob_Bence. That's at Rob_Bence. But the Property Podcast is also on there and putting decent stuff on already, and with more to come. So check out the Property Hub as well, which you'll find at Property Hub UK.
Okay, next on my list, something completely different. Actually, not that different from Instagram because it is visual, but this is called Life Cake, and this is for the parents out there. I became a parent this year, so naturally I now have thousands of photos on my phone of my son, and Lifecake is a brilliant app for organising those and sharing them with family. The clever bit is you can upload them whenever, and it can detect the date that it was taken and put them into order. So you don't have to be really organised and add a photo every day or anything, but whenever you put some, it puts them in order so you can scroll back through and watch them change over time. It's also a really handy way of sharing those with family without putting them on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that if you don't want to. So I know a lot of our listeners do have young families, and that's an app that they might want to check out.
Now, you may be listening to this podcast in your car right now. Hello, if you are. And if you're in your car, if you're travelling, particularly to somewhere new, if you haven't downloaded Waze already, you must. Well, not now while you're driving, because that's dangerous, but when you stop, download Waze. Waze is the Uber of SatNav. It's just a game changer. It is so much better than any other satellite navigation system I've ever used. It's free to download, and it is just remarkable at how effective it is. But it's not just good at picking the best routes for you, because it uses all the data from other people travelling as well and the reports that they drop in. It will tell you if there's a car on the side of the road, if someone's broken down, if there's police ahead, if there's a pothole in the road. The accuracy is incredible. It's a great app. For me, it's one of those, when you get a new phone, it should be in the first 10 you download. It's that good. A fantastic app if you ever have to drive, which for most of us, we do.
And finally, I thought right at the end I'd smuggle a little bit of property into this episode. This is another one that we've talked about on Hub Extra in the past, but very much worth talking about again in case you missed it. This is Property Log. It's an extension for Chrome that gives you extra information about every listing on Rightmove. If you ever used Property B in the past, that's been dying a bit of a death slowly over the last couple of years, but Property Log is exactly the same and it works. You install it, you go to Rightmove, you get to see the whole price history, when it was listed, when the price was reduced, and you can use that as a bit of extra leverage when you're negotiating, giving yourself a powerful bit of information that most other people won't have. Unless, of course, they listen to this podcast as well, in which case they deserve it.
So they are our best resources of 2018, and it's quite a list, loads for you to get into there. But remember, every week we'll give you more through Hub Extra, but you can also get more for your inbox as well through the Hub Extra email. All you have to do is be signed up to the Property Hub website, which is absolutely free to do, and the email you receive each week gives you a pick of the best resources, blogs, and social posts we see every week. So if you're not signed up yet, get along and do that now.
So those were our resources of the year. But what have you enjoyed? Let us know on the socials. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. And if you want to know what we get up away from the podcast, then join our Discovery webinar. If you haven't been on one of our Discovery webinars yet, then January is the perfect one to come along to. Register for that. It's free at thepropertyhub.net/discover. We'll be back next week with our review of 2018. Until then, have a very happy Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.